My name is Olivia, I am 32 years old, and I just realized I was never actually a daughter in my family. I was a high-yield investment they decided to stop servicing. The moment of clarity lasted exactly 47 seconds. I was standing in a San Francisco bridal boutique, clutching a white silk veil, when my mother, Jennifer, called. She did not ask if the dress fit. She just said they were not coming. My wedding day conflicted with my sister Serena's fan appreciation birthday party. Serena is an influencer. I was just the family cash machine. In 47 seconds, my blood debt was settled. Please take a moment to leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I did not cry in the bridal shop. I did not ask Jennifer for an explanation I already knew. I did not even argue. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. It was a balance sheet that finally refused to balance. I finished my fitting, paid the remaining balance on my ivory gown, and walked out into the San Francisco sunshine. The city was bustling, but inside my head, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a controlled demolition. When I reached my studio, the air smelled like expensive cedar and fresh blueprints. This space was mine. I had built golden era interiors while skipping meals and working 18-hour days, all while my family treated my success as their personal trust fund. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. The blue light hit my face, illuminating a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I navigated to my banking portal. I did not hesitate. I did not wait for a moment of weakness to pass. I looked at the recurring transfers tab. There it was. $5,000. Every first of the month, like clockwork, sent to Jason and Jennifer. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for a decade. I had been paying for a seat at a table that was never actually set for me. I called Julian, my fiancé, seeking a voice of reason. Through him, I felt the steady, protective shadow of his father, Robert. A titan in San Francisco real estate, Robert had always treated me with a professional respect my own father lacked. He once warned me over dinner, "Olivia, a structure is only as strong as its foundation, and your family is built on shifting sand." At the time, I thought he was being cynical. Now, I realized he was being prophetic. My finger hovered over the delete button. I thought about the 300 guests Jennifer bragged about for Serena's party. I thought about the $75,000 venue they expected me to help fund. I realized my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. This was not a breakdown. It was accounting. I clicked delete, then confirm. The recurring transfer disappeared. The screen refreshed, leaving a clean, empty space. For the first time in 10 years, my income belonged to me. My future belonged to me. The silence in the studio was absolute, broken only by the steady hum of my computer fan. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. I had just closed a 10-year subscription to a family that viewed me as an automated teller machine with a heartbeat. They were not going to be shocked by what they had done. They were going to be shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. I looked at the calendar on my desk. June 15th, my wedding day. It was no longer the day I would beg for their presence. It was the day I would officially declare my independence. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I had not even known I was carrying. The demolition was complete. Now, it was time to build something real. I sat in the dim light of my office, the blue glow of my laptop screen illuminating the columns of a spreadsheet that had been my silent witness for years. It was not just a document. It was an autopsy of my self-worth. It was a ledger of every time I had mistaken a transaction for a hug. I started scrolling, and the numbers began to bleed together until they formed a terrifying total. $500,000. $500,000. Say it out loud, and it sounds like a house in the hills or a retirement fund. For me, it was the blood tax I had been paying since the moment I was old enough to handle a paycheck. It was the price of a seat at a family table where I was only ever allowed to sit if I brought the wine, the food, and paid the rent. I remembered the small room next to the garage. The water heater would groan every night, a mechanical heart that felt just as overworked as I was. That room was my first lesson in being second best. Serena had the room with the large bay window that overlooked the garden. She had the designer curtains and the rug that felt like walking on clouds. I had the smell of motor oil and cold concrete. I used to tell myself that being useful was the same thing as being loved. I thought that if I could just be responsible enough, if I could just solve enough of their emergencies, I would eventually earn the right to be a real daughter. I lived in a prison I had built for myself out of a misplaced sense of gratitude. This was the invisible chain of the survivor. I was a prisoner who thought that if she polished the bars well enough, they would eventually turn into a door. I was the child who was parentified far too early, convinced that the survival of the family depended on my silence and my labor. I stayed quiet when Serena got the cherry red car for a 2.8 grade point average, while I was taking the bus to work 20 hours a week to keep a 3.7. I stayed quiet when Jennifer and Jason took her on spa days, while I was eating ramen for 3 meals a day to pay down the credit card debt they had borrowed for a mortgage payment that actually funded a golf trip. This was the trap. I thought I was paying off a debt for being raised, but love is not a loan you can never satisfy. My family did not see a daughter. They saw an asset. My success as an interior designer was not something to be proud of. It was just a resource to be harvested. I had spent 8 years sending $5,000 every single month, plus the larger injections for Serena's influencer brand launches and their unforeseen expenses. While I was drafting floor plans until 4 in the morning and building golden era interiors from a laptop in a studio apartment, they were living a life subsidized by my exhaustion. Every time they called me independent, they were not complimenting my strength. They were excusing their neglect. They called me strong because it meant they did not have to help me. They called me reliable because it meant I was easy to use. I looked at the spreadsheet again. $500,000 spent on people who would not even give me 47 seconds of their time to say they were coming to my wedding. The contrast was lethal. My self-made success was real, built on sweat and blueprints. Their status was a hollow shell, a vacuum of power that I had been filling with my own blood for a decade. The chain did not break because I was weak, it broke because the weight of their entitlement finally exceeded the strength of my patience. The silence did not last past the first of the month. $5,000 is a significant amount of money to lose when you have not worked a single day to earn it. The notification from their bank must have hit like a physical blow, because by 9 o'clock on Monday morning, my phone was a war zone. Jennifer called first. Her voice, usually practiced in a tone of fragile elegance, was jagged and shrill. She did not ask how I was. She did not apologize for the wedding. She demanded to know why the transfer had not cleared. When I told her the subscription had ended, the mask did not just slip, it shattered. She called me a monster. She said I was trying to kill my father with stress. It was a fascinating performance, but I was no longer interested in buying tickets. Serena's retaliation was much louder and much more public. Being an influencer meant her primary weapon was her digital footprint, and she used it to pivot from fan appreciation to victimhood in under an hour. She posted a tearful story on her main account, talking about how a certain family member had abandoned their struggling parents during a financial crisis. She did not name me, but she did not have to. The comments flooded in, thousands of strangers calling me heartless, selfish, and ungrateful. I watched the engagement numbers climb on her post and realized that even my pain was just content for her. I was the villain in her narrative because it was the most profitable role she could assign me. Jason's texts were fewer, but more clinical. He spoke of family obligations and the moral debt I owed them for my upbringing. He talked about the house they had helped me secure, ignoring the fact that I had paid for every repair, every tax bill, and every mortgage payment for nearly a decade. To them, my success was a communal pool they had every right to swim in, regardless of how much I had to drown to keep it filled. They were not angry because I was hurting. They were angry because the automated teller machine had finally developed a conscience and walked away. I did not answer a single one. I did not engage with the comments or the crying voicemails. Every word they spoke was a confirmation that I had made the right choice. Their love was a transaction that had finally gone into default. While Serena was busy manufacturing outrage for her followers, I was at my studio, focused on the final details for my wedding to Julian. Julian did not care about the $500,000. He did not care about the influencer parties or the family image. He looked at me and saw a person, not a resource. We spent the week finalizing our guest list, a list of people who actually showed up when the bills were not being paid. I was a liability to my biological family now, and that was the most liberating thing I had ever been. My silence was not a weakness. It was a boundary. And for the first time in 32 years, it was non-negotiable. The dinner with Julian and Robert was not just a meal. It was an education in what family was actually supposed to be. There were no demands for money between the courses, no passive-aggressive comments about my career, and no scripted guilt trips. Robert sat at the head of the table, his eyes kind but sharp, the kind of gaze that had made him a legend in San Francisco real estate. He did not care about Serena's follower count or the social optics of my wedding. He cared about the truth. While Jennifer was busy screaming into my voicemail, Robert had been busy reading between the lines of the financial documents I had shared with him. Robert didn't just offer sympathy, he offered his arsenal. As a major shareholder at the bank where my accounts were held, he had the leverage to bypass the usual bureaucratic red tape. "I've put my personal forensic auditors on this, Olivia," he told me, his voice a calm tide in my storm. "They don't look for feelings, they look for footprints. And your parents left a trail of mud all over your heritage." After the dessert was cleared, the atmosphere shifted from domestic warmth to professional precision. We moved into Robert's study, a room that smelled of old leather and heavy responsibility. He sat behind his desk and pulled a manila folder from the top drawer. He did not offer comfort, he offered evidence. Robert had been looking into my birth parents' estate, specifically the apartment in Nob Hill that was supposed to be my only inheritance. He pointed to a signature on a document from 5 years ago. It was a second mortgage, one I had no memory of signing. This was the moment I realized the status Jason and Jennifer worked so hard to project was nothing more than an empty wallet illusion. For a decade, they had been performing the role of successful upper-middle-class parents using a script I had unintentionally written for them. Every designer bag Jennifer carried, every country club membership Jason maintained, and every luxury vacation Serena posted about was a vacuum of power that I had been filling with my own sweat. They were living in a hallucination of wealth, a hollow shell of a life that required my constant financial transfusions to keep from collapsing. Without my $5,000 a month, they did not just lose their lifestyle, they lost their identity. They were renters in a world they claimed to own, and the rent was finally due. Robert looked at me with a grim, knowing expression. He told me that people who build their lives on the labor of others eventually forget how to stand on their own. They were not just ungrateful, they were desperate to maintain a facade that had no foundation. Their arrogance was a mask for their fragility. My $500,000 had not been a gift to help them thrive. It had been a life support system for a lie. I looked at the forged documents and felt the last of my hesitation vanish. The emotional drama was over. The professional warfare had begun. Robert leaned back and told me he had already contacted a forensic accountant and a private investigator. We were not just going to stop the money, we were going to trace every cent of the $500,000 I had sent them and find out exactly how deep the betrayal went. I rubbed my thumb over the forged signature on the page. It was a clumsy imitation of my handwriting, a physical manifestation of their contempt for my autonomy. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt like a technician preparing for a complex repair. This was not a family dispute, it was a criminal audit. Robert told me we would have the full report within 2 weeks. I thanked him, stood up, and walked out of the study with a sense of purpose that was cold, factual, and lethal. The era of the family cash machine was officially closed. The era of the reckoning had begun. I looked at the paper under the harsh, clinical light of the desk lamp. The white surface seemed to glow, making the black ink of the signature pulse like a fresh wound. Robert did not say a word he did not have to. The sensory details of the room, the smell of old leather, the ticking of a heavy grandfather clock, the cold air hitting my skin all anchored me to a reality I never wanted to face. This was the deep twist that turned a painful family drama into a calculated criminal case. For years, I believed I was paying for love. I thought that $500,000 was the price of being a good daughter. But looking at this document, I realized I had not just been a cash cow. I had been a victim of identity theft by the people who called themselves my parents. The apartment in Nob Hill was the only link to the biological parents I barely remembered. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, my ultimate safety net. But Jason and Jennifer had seen it as just another asset to be liquidated for their own greed. They had forged my signature on a second mortgage application 5 years ago. I traced the curves of my own name, written by a hand that was not mine. It was a clumsy, desperate imitation, a physical proof of their contempt for my life and my future. I thought back to the invisible chain that had held me for so long. I had been an architect of my own misery, building a pedestal for people who were busy digging a pit for me to fall into. They used my name to build their lies. They used my credit to buy their status. And while I was measuring floor plans and obsessing over color palettes for clients, they were measuring the value of a daughter they never intended to keep. I felt a coldness settle in my bones that had nothing to do with the San Francisco fog. This was the kill shot. Up until this moment, a tiny, weak part of me, the little girl who still lived in the room next to the garage, wondered if there was a way back. I wondered if, after the anger faded, we could be normal again. But you do not go back to normal with people who use your name to commit fraud. You do not reconcile with people who treat your birthright like a blank check. This discovery removed any remaining path to redemption for them. They were not just ungrateful or selfish, they were criminals. They had not just overdrafted my compassion, they had systematically stolen my heritage to fund Serena's hollow influencer lifestyle. Every emergency they had called about was a smokescreen to hide the fact that they were slowly cannibalizing my identity. Robert leaned forward, his voice low and steady. He told me that we had enough for a criminal referral. He explained that a forgery of this magnitude, involving property and banking institutions, carried significant jail time. I did not flinch. I did not feel a pang of guilt. I just felt a deep, resonant clarity. I realized that the illusion of power they held over me was gone forever. Their status was a house of cards built on my sweat, and I was finally the wind. I closed the folder with a sharp snap. The sound echoed in the quiet study like a gavel hitting a bench. I was not just an interior designer anymore. I was a witness for the prosecution. I looked at Robert and told him to proceed with everything. The forensic audit, the private investigator, the legal filings. We were going to pull back every curtain they had used to hide their rot. This was not about the money anymore. This was about justice, factual and undeniable. I was no longer playing their game. I was defining the new rules. The grand opening of my new San Francisco design gallery was a masterpiece of light and glass. High-profile clients and local media mingled among my latest installations, the air humming with the soft clinking of crystal and the scent of expensive orchids. I stood near the center, feeling for the first time like the architect of my own destiny, not the foundation for someone else's lies. Then, the heavy doors swung open, and the atmosphere shifted from elegance to predatory intent. As Jason and Jennifer marched toward me, Robert stepped forward to stand silently by my shoulder. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a wall of granite. For the first time in my life, I saw my father, Jason, actually look small. He recognized Robert not just as my future father-in-law, but as the man who held the keys to the very world they were so desperate to pretend they belonged to. Jason, Jennifer, and Serena marched in like they owned the square footage. Jennifer did not wait for a greeting. She raised her voice, her tone, a rehearsed mix of heartbreak and parental authority, loud enough to stop every conversation in the room. "Olivia, how can you stand here celebrating when your family is facing ruin?" she cried, her eyes darting toward the reporter from the design magazine. "You have abandoned the people who gave you everything. We are losing our home while you throw parties with strangers." I did not flinch. I did not try to usher them into a back room. This was the power flip climax, and I was the one holding the cards. I signaled to Julian, who handed me the heavy manila folder I had prepared. I stepped forward, not as the child who carried their burdens, but as the principal delivering a final verdict. "You want to talk about what you are owed, Mom? Let's talk in front of everyone." I opened the folder and set it on a marble display pedestal. "These are 8 years of bank statements," I said, my voice cold and clinical. "The total I have transferred to you since I was 24 years old is exactly $500,000. A collective gasp rippled through my guests. I turned the pages, pointing to the highlighted rows. Every mortgage emergency that was actually a spa day. Every textbook for Serena that turned into a designer handbag. "But that is not why we are done," I continued, leaning in as Jennifer's face went from blotchy red to a deathly pale. "We are done because Robert and his team found the second mortgage you took out on my birth parents' apartment. The one where you forged my signature to fund Serena's latest influencer party." I pulled out the forensic report, the forged signature enlarged for anyone to see. The reporter was recording every second. A longtime client, a woman who had known my family for years, stepped forward with a look of pure disgust. "You should be ashamed," she said to Jennifer. "You took $500,000 from a grieving daughter and repaid her with fraud. You are not family, you are vultures." Jennifer tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no words came. Jason looked at the floor, his posture finally as diminished as his integrity. "I have already filed the criminal report for identity theft and forgery," I said, my voice steady and lethal. "You have 90 days to move out of the house I have been paying for. Do not call, do not text. The automated teller machine is permanently closed." I nodded toward the exit. "Security will see you out." They shuffled toward the door in total silence, the illusion of power they had held over me for 32 years turning to ash in the San Francisco light. 1 year has passed since the silence became permanent. The parents who once viewed me as a high-yield investment now live in a cramped rental apartment in the suburbs, learning to exist on the very scraps they once fed me. Serena has completely vanished from the elite circles she spent my sweat and blood to infiltrate her influence, turned to dust the second the cash stopped. I sit in my own home, holding my daughter, Lily. She will never grow up in the shadow of a golden child or be told her dreams are a burden. Her worth will never be a transaction. I have used the restitution from the Nob Hill fraud to launch the Lily Dawn Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping young talents with backgrounds like mine to find their footing. This is the justice of the seed sower. I have finally learned that true victory is not found in the destruction of those who hurt you, but in the architecture of a future they can never touch. I am no longer a family cash machine. I am the author of my own peace. The debt is finally settled. If this story reminded you that your peace is worth more than a blood debt, please leave a heart symbol in the comments. Subscribe to hear more stories of justice and resilience. Your new dawn starts now.